This is a talk, obviously, from over 10 years ago. I gave it a number of times in 2010, most appropriately at iSeed in Boulder, Colorado. There are a lot of lessons that are still, I think, appropriate. It's also kind of a giggle, as they say, as the kids say, to go back and revisit some of this. This is a slide I first used in 2005, talking to the Houston chapter of the IAEE, and I was saying, gee, the price is up, but it seems unlikely to stay up. It'll probably be like $40, maybe $30, kind of like 1986. I expected supply to recover after the Gulf War and the Venezuelan troubles much faster than they did. Obviously, the latter never recovered at all. So forecasting has a long history. In ancient times, it was prophesying, and the idea was that soothsayers would ask a question of the gods, and then the gods would give the answer in various forms. For instance, the entrails of an animal would look a certain way if the gods approved of your request. My favorite example was the Castalian fountain in Turkey. This is just a generic fountain picture, I'm afraid. The Roman Emperor Hadrian went, and it was famous for giving prophecies to people, and he received his own prophecy. It's not clear if he liked it or not, but since he had the fountain bricked up after that, one must assume he was not altogether approving of his forecaster. I think there are probably a lot of industry executives who wish they could do the same now. When will prices recover? Well, at the time I gave this talk, the price was about $80. And people were saying, my God, it's so low, which it looks like from this graph, but it was only low in comparison to the ultra high prices you had around 2008. This is the DOE oil price forecast that was then the current forecast, 2009, 2010. And they were saying, yes, the price is, around $80. By 2015, it'll be 110, and then it will just keep going up. This was pretty much a consensus view. If you put it in historical context, though, the long-term oil price, and I only went back to 1900, the scaling change makes the trend in prices look much steeper. And in fact, you see that the forecast is far beyond historical experience, which doesn't mean it's impossible, but it makes you sort of wonder if maybe it needed a little work, some more careful consideration, as the kids say. Well, when I talk about the history and repeating itself, I'm always reminded of Karl Marx. He said, Hegel says history repeats itself, but he doesn't mention that the first time was tragedy and the second time was farce. Well, here's the tragedy. 1980 at Stanford, EMF 6, Energy Modeling Forum 6, all the forecasters said, one forecaster said the price having tripled will stay flat. The IPE model I worked on with Nazli Shukri said, oh, the price goes down for 5 years and then goes up, and everybody else said it goes up. So the average price forecast in the year 2000 was something like, I think about $150 if you adjust for inflation. We were off by about 150%, and I get to brag about that, which you'll probably never see anybody else bragging about that type of error. So let's go through some other examples that might amuse people. Biodiesel. Many people in the last 20 years have said, aha, jatropha is the next source of biodiesel. It grows in an arid environment, and it gives you a bean that you can use to make essentially biodiesel, which is great. Unfortunately, people don't seem to remember that in the 70s, they said the same thing about the jojoba bean. It grows in arid areas. It gives you a diesel fuel. And people planted a lot of it. It is mainly used in cosmetics these days. I think it's very good for your skin. Resource nationalism. Wow. Everybody was worried that, resource nationalism would mean that it would be harder to drill in places, for example, Venezuela, here's Hugo Chavez hugging his hero, Fidel Castro, very delighted to embrace the economic policies of Fidel Castro. This is in the early 2000s. And this is the kind of thing that worried people and made them think, oh my God, how will the industry ever cope? Well, if you're a little older, you might recognize this guy. This is on the left, again, Fidel Castro, but on the right, it's Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. And he, in fact, nationalized or tried to nationalize some of the foreign oil holdings, especially the American companies, and created Petro-Canada using taxes on oil to invest and buy up assets. That didn't last too long. Resource nationalism comes and goes. The peak, we've been predicting peak oil. People say, well, no, it's different this time. The famed economist James Schlesinger, who, yes, he had a PhD in economics. He was Secretary of Defense, head of the CIA, and the first Secretary of Energy. And in about 2005, he said, you know, the debate is over. We now realize peak oil has come. The funny thing is, he said the same thing in 1979 when he was Secretary of Energy. He said, I don't think we'll ever see oil production higher than the current level. It was then 65 million barrels a day. Before the pandemic, it was 100. And amazingly, we have a president who supports nuclear power. We also had one who supported nuclear power in the 70s, except he called it nuclear. Which led to a New Yorker cartoon of a security fence with a sign that says, no one who says the word nuclear be allowed beyond this point. And of course, lots of people were saying, oh my God, because oil fields decline, it means the world now needed to replace an amount of oil equivalent to Saudi Arabia's oil production every 2 years. This is MIT PhD in physics Joe Romm, who derided me for not believing in peak oil. Unfortunately, because Joe Romm is not really an oil expert and hasn't been doing this for that long, he doesn't know that in 77, Jimmy Carter's moral equivalent of war speech, meow, said, just to stay even, we need the production of a new Texas every year, an Alaskan North Slope every 9 months, or a new Saudi Arabia every 3 years. Obviously, this cannot continue. Obviously, it did continue. And here we have former CIA Director James Woolsey telling us we urgently need to reduce oil dependence in the short term. This means lowering demand and utilizing substitutes as cheaply and as quickly as possible. Well, what a novel idea, except Nixon's the one. He said, we will break the back of the energy crisis. We will lay the foundation for our future capacity to meet America's energy needs from America's own resources. That was 1974. I believe the Watergate burglars were actually looking for the Democratic energy policy to see if maybe they could find a way to honor his pledge. So this is very typical. Thomas L. Friedman, the New York Times columnist, like many others, said, I believe this Chinese decision to go green is the 21st century of the Soviet Union's 1957 launch of Sputnik, the world's first Earth-orbiting satellite. Well, folks, Sputnik just went up again. China is going clean tech. So I guess you could say if your friends told you to drive an electric car off a bridge, would you do it? Well, Tom Friedman would, I guess. But that always reminds me of the story from Nikita Khrushchev's autobiography, which is a wonderful 2-volume book. He said, Eisenhower said, how do your generals get you to fund a program? He said, well, they say, he says, let me tell you what my generals say. We have reliable information that the Soviet Union has already allocated funds for their own such program. Therefore, if we don't get the funds we need, we'll fall behind the Soviet Union. Those of you who are a little younger might remember the 1980s. Oh my God, we're going to fall behind the Japanese unless we fund the supercomputer project, for example. Vehicle efficiency. Well, everybody talks about vehicle efficiency, and this is the smart car. It's a very efficient vehicle. Uh, but, efficiency isn't everything. I have seen these cars on US roads, not very many of them, a lot more in Europe, I think. If you want efficiency, I would point out that the oxen digest food 30% more efficiently than a horse. I'm not sure. Well, okay, there was one movie about a cowboy who rode a buffalo, but I don't think any cowboys rode oxens instead of cows. I don't think you'll go to Kentucky Derby and see racing oxens because there's something more than fuel efficiency. And if you think that the smart car is emasculating and oxens are just neutered bulls, there's an alternative. You can put your smart car up on wheels and become a monster smart car. Maybe it's a smart monster car. Well, environmentally friendly versus imperial exploitation. Of course, one is very good. Like here we see the pedicab. I'm not sure. This might be Singapore. It might be New York. I've ridden one in New York. It didn't look anywhere near as nice as this, and I wouldn't say left me fearing for my life, but left me concerned about my life insurance policy status. But this is not a new technology. This is from the 19th century, I'm going to guess early 20th. Rickshaws, which was considered very demeaning and humiliating. I guess if you have a degree in French literature, doing a pedicab makes you a good person. If you are a peasant, you're being exploited. And then there's always people power. Yes, see, you can do this all you want. You don't need batteries. You don't need fuel. Well, maybe a little Gatorade, some energy bars. I mean, candy bars, energy bars. Sorry, I have to remember these things. That's not new either. We've had self-propelled vehicles since the Stone Age. Well, one Stone Age at least. So let's look back. From 1980 to 1985, the market weakened continuously. Prices only dropped slightly, and they were more than twice the pre-29 level. And at that time, people were saying the same thing they were saying in 2010. The prices will soon recover. They're saying high prices aren't important. Demand is down because of recession. Demand recovery is imminent. Non-OPEC has peaked. They said every place outside the Persian Gulf except Mexico has peaked. People talked about the OPEC multiplier, Maury Edelman, among others. And it basically said if all the new oil has to be supplied by OPEC, that means a 1% increase in oil demand is a 2.5% increase in OPEC sales. And there was one economist in Washington published in the OECD Observer the argument that costs are so high that the price in 1985, when it was that would be about $70 in current prices, that the price was too low then. That was literally published 2 months before the oil price collapsed in late 1985. So let's compare 2007, 2010. Frankly, the current price is about the same as 2007, just before it soared. That doesn't mean the price is too low. I would say it means that basically the market's kind of tight at this point, and prices could come down. They did, in fact, go up for a while. I argued that, well, the difference between 2007 now is inventories are higher. There's more surplus capacity in OPEC. The situation in Nigeria had improved. Iraqi oil production was somewhat higher. There were sanctions threatened against Iran in 2007. They were looming in 2010 when I gave this talk, and they were implemented. But essentially, at the time when people were saying the price is on the verge of recovering, and it did thereafter go up to $100 a barrel for several years, the fundamentals were not, in fact, very bullish. So the question of cost, this is something I've written on. You can see in my book, The Peak Oil Scare, there's a chapter on costs. And the fact of the matter is, whenever costs go up, people say this is permanent. It's because the easy oil is gone. It's because we're drilling deeper, smaller fields and so forth. But in fact, what tends to happen is that when you see the price go up, drilling goes up, and the cost of input factors, that is, the rental rates for rigs, steel, cement, labor, and everything, it all goes up, and it will tend to come down. There's also a problem that people often include taxes in the cost, and taxes are geared to prices. So when prices go up, taxes go up too. So companies are paying more maybe for the oil, but that's not a cost. That's a transfer payment or a rent. So the point is, costs respond to prices. If prices go up, costs go up. If prices go down, costs go down. It's not perfect by any means, but the whole notion that oil prices have a floor of $100 a barrel when the price is 100 because that's the cost, that's basically a fallacy. This is from an investment bank, which said, what is the cost of different projects? 20 divided into groups of 20, and they said, the most expensive are about $85. However, you'll notice that the tax, the differential, the margin, that's most of the cost. The actual operating and finding and development cost was still about $15. Steel prices, you can see they tend to come down over the long term, but they are cyclical, especially when energy prices go up, as they did in the late 70s or in the early 2000s. We're not running out of steel. We're not running out of iron ore. This is completely due to cyclical factors. You can see, in fact, that wells do get deeper over time. That is generally true. These are our drilling categories from the American Petroleum Institute's survey of drilling. They break it down into depth categories on the x-axis there, 0 to 1249 feet, 1250 to 2499, and so forth. And you can see that they're slowly drilling deeper, more wells at deeper depth categories. But there are offsetting factors. Rig efficiency has gone up by about 2% a year over the long term. It does go up and down cyclically. Again, if you start drilling a lot, as you did in the late 70s, you're hiring less experienced people. You're using some of the equipment you would normally leave in the back lot. So it goes down, but you can see just generally that the number of wells, the number of feet drilled per year has tended to go up over the long term. Wells have gotten deeper in recent years. That's why you have the feet per rig going up faster than the wells per rig. The non-OPEC trend has flattened out just recently, and that was a concern for people, but it largely reflected the fact that in 1998, the oil price collapsed from a low level of $20 to an ultra low level of $12. It was not like the 1985 collapse from a high level of $35 to $18, which was sort of the norm, and those are nominal prices. So essentially, yeah, you lost a lot, and that has sort of been not the first time it's happened. You can see if you go back further, several times when the price went down, you did tend to have a flattening out in production. And we have seen since then, you've had a significant recovery, although the biggest impact was in the shale fields, which is something a topic for a completely different time. So all the problems people talked about, the peak of oil, the scarce resources, the high costs, the resource nationalism, and all the wonderful solutions like, solar's here, Jatropha is going to make cheap biodiesel, and so forth. Those, we've heard them all before. Just many people either didn't hear them or conveniently or not forgot them. What we've been seeing lately is a transient. The high prices from 2004 to 2014 were because first the price collapse meant less drilling, plus a lot of money went into Venezuela and the former Soviet Union in the 90s and early 2000s, especially the latter. It's about 5 million barrels a day investment there instead of in non-OPEC. And people were putting money into LNG and solar. Yeah, I think the tipping point is here. Okay, if you look at my 2012 talk at OPEC, you'll see I was saying the long-term price is 50 to 60. I didn't predict it would happen in 2014-15. I thought that was sooner because Saudi production had not been under pressure, but I think they saw the handwriting on the wall or the fracking in the Permian and realized that they were going to have too much competition. So as I said, the market moved into a relative glut, but not the kind of collapse you saw for OPEC oil supply, demand for OPEC oil that you had in the 1980s. Um, this shows you, again, this is from a 2010 presentation. The Saudi market share had dropped enormously in the early 80s. It had not in the 2008 to 2010 era when I gave this talk, and so I did not feel that the market was in a strong glut at that time. I have other work similarly. This does show that the Saudis had been cutting back recently. Partly the recession. A lot of that was the 2008, the great financial recession. So where are we going from here? Well, at the time I was looking at two particular Latin American leaders. One is President Kirchner in Argentina, who was following a Peronist vision, renationalized the national oil company, which had been privatized and sold off, basically spent a lot of money that she didn't have, or the government didn't have, and left the country in a bit of a mess. And I contrasted that with President Lula of Brazil, who was a very interesting combination of conservative economic policy that is sort of pro-growth, but with the idea of using the increased revenue from the economic growth and taxes to support social spending. I generally speaking applaud that idea. Um, but there's also two different visions that are more pertinent to the oil industry. You've got the late Hugo Chavez, who essentially thought he could command the economy the way he could a soldier. And the economy did not agree. What it would be like, what would be nice is if you had instead a return of Luis Justi, who led the Apertura in Venezuela in the 90s. And for those who don't remember, the Apertura saw a huge increase in oil production, and a lot of that was shifting from the state oil company to private actors who went in and redeveloped what were called marginal fields and added something like 600,000 barrels a day in a few years. And then they got in a lot of investment in heavy oil production. But the boom in Venezuela, which was a good part of the reason for the 1998 collapse, that was also, frankly, uh, far beyond what anybody had expected. It was a real shock to people that they were able to produce that much more oil. So where do we go? Well, what I said is, liquidity dries up, prices drop. You get more production from Iraq and Nigeria. Nigeria turned out not to be so much the case. I also predicted you'd get a lot of non-OPEC production, including from the former Soviet Union, a lot of NGLs. Those were reasonably good. And I said you'd probably see prices depressed. They were not depressed until later, partly because a year after this you had the Arab Spring. You lost over 2 million barrels a day of high quality crude from Libya, plus Syria, Yemen, Sudan. And so the prices stayed up several years longer than I expected, but did ultimately come down. I thought that would cause demand to recover, but now we're in a pandemic, so it's a little hard to see in the near term future. And I said, a price collapse could restart the cycle. You could see unrest in Venezuela, Iran, Nigeria, economies that are already in bad shape at the time of this talk and remain so today. There was not that much surplus capacity at the time. And so, if you get some kind of supply disruption, you would see another price spike. And that, in fact, is what happened. And of course, I said, but everybody will say, no, it's peak oil. It's nothing to do with the Arab Spring. Trust us this time for sure, as the great philosopher Bullwinkle J. Moose used to say. So what is the we expect for the industry? I said, the small players in service industry will get clobbered. Big projects in deep water will generally be better off. The downstream will not be well because they haven't been good for my lifetime, as near as I can tell. High cost projects would die off. I said tar sands, LNG. LNG has done a lot better. A lot of that is because of environmental pushes, the Fukushima accident in Japan and so forth. I said, you know, solar photovoltaics, electric cars, they would be gone but not forgotten. Well, they've done better than I expected. Costs have come down a lot, especially for solar, but they're very heavily subsidized these days, which I did not predict. So I said, well, the funny thing is consumers tend to win if they're lucky. They suffer volatility if they're unlucky, but at least volatility is good for consultants like moi.